the warmth of shared exhaustion. The navigator, meanwhile, remains mostly silent. Their eyes never stop moving, scanning watercolor, listening to surf, feeling swells. And you realize how mentally exhausting this must be. They can't truly relax until landfall is secure. They're responsible not just for reaching land, but for reaching it safely. Historians still argue whether navigators relied more heavily on sensory cues like watercolor and reef sound during landfall, or whether they had memorized specific reef passages through repeated voyages. Likely both. Experience builds familiarity, but the environment can change. Storms can reshape reefs, tides shift, currents alter. So the navigator must remain flexible. The canoe edges forward. The watercolor begins to change, even in the dark. It's subtle, but you can see faint patches that look lighter, as if the sea is shallower. You can almost sense the reef beneath the surface, invisible but present. The surf sound becomes sharper. You can hear individual waves breaking, the hiss of foam, the low boom of water meeting coral. The navigator raises a hand slightly, and the paddlers slow. Everyone becomes quiet. The canoe drifts. You hold your breath instinctively, as if breathing might make too much noise. The navigator listens. They are listening for a gap. Wetness is approaching. Meanwhile, you smell rain and think, "Great, my hair is ruined." The wind picks up again, stronger now, and you hear the sail flap sharply. The crew moves quickly to lower it, folding it down so it doesn't become a giant, uncontrollable kite. Paddles take over. The canoe moves forward under human power now, steady and controlled. The first drops of rain fall, soft at first like someone sprinkling water from their fingertips, then heavier, a quick shower that darkens everything. The rain is warm, almost comforting, but it changes visibility. The stars vanish behind cloud cover. The sky is gone, and you realize why navigators can't rely on stars alone. Because the sky can disappear in minutes. Historians still argue whether navigators developed their systems primarily for clear sky conditions or whether storm navigation was equally central to their training. But it seems obvious that in the Pacific, where squalls are common, storm skills would have been essential. Because if you can only navigate on perfect nights, you're not a navigator. You're a tourist. The navigator shifts their posture, closing their eyes briefly again, feeling the canoe's movement. Without stars, they rely on swells and wind. Even in the lagoon, there are subtle wave patterns. The wind pushes ripples across the surface. The current flows through reef channels. The navigator can feel it all. The crew paddles steadily. Rain patters on the wooden platform. Water drips from your hair and down your neck. You shiver slightly, even though the air is warm, because being wet makes you feel vulnerable. You pull your shoulders inward, trying to make yourself smaller. The navigator remains upright, unbothered, like rain is just another form of ocean commentary. The wind gusts again, and the canoe tilts slightly. The crew adjusts instantly, shifting weight to keep balance. The lashings creak softly, flexing as the canoe responds. You feel the canoe's design working. A small wave breaking over a coral head inside the lagoon. Not as violent as the reef surf, but enough to warn you. The navigator sees it instantly and signals the paddlers to steer around it. The canoe shifts course smoothly, slipping past the hazard. You exhale, realizing you'd been holding your breath again. You keep doing that. It's not helpful, but it's very you. A quirky tidbit. Some Pacific sailors reportedly used long poles to test depth in shallow lagoons, gently probing ahead to avoid grounding. Imagine being in charge of poking the ocean floor with a stick while everyone else trusts you. That's a level of confidence you do not currently possess. The canoe continues toward shore. The sand is visible now, pale under starlight. The water is so clear that you can almost see the bottom, patches of sand and coral shapes. The navigator raises a hand, and the paddlers slow. The canoe drifts. Then paddles move again, carefully guiding the canoe toward the beach at an angle, so the hulls won't scrape. The crew shifts weight, balancing. Someone stands, quietly, steady-footed, and prepares to step into shallow water. You watch them with admiration, because if you tried to stand right now, you'd probably fall into the lagoon and become a very embarrassing historical footnote. The canoe nudges forward. The water becomes ankle-deep, then knee-deep. The crew member steps out, waiting silently. They hold the canoe steady, guiding it toward the sand. The canoe's hull scrapes softly, just a gentle kiss against the beach. And suddenly, you are here. Landfall. Not with trumpets, not with fireworks, just with the quiet sound of water lapping against sand. The crew begins unloading supplies carefully. Gourds are passed hand to hand. Bundles of food are lifted. Ropes are untied. Everything is done with calm efficiency. The navigator steps onto the sand last, their feet sinking slightly. They stand still for a moment, looking back at the canoe, then out toward the lagoon. Tapaya could reportedly describe routes and island positions across a vast area of the Pacific. Cook's crew, who had been congratulating themselves for discovering islands, suddenly had to face the awkward reality that the people they met already knew where everything was. Imagine thinking you've invented a new travel destination, only to find out the locals have been commuting there for centuries. It's like walking into a coffee shop and proudly announcing, "I have discovered espresso," and the barista just stares at you. Historians still argue how much European explorers truly understood or recorded Polynesian navigational knowledge, and whether some deliberately downplayed it. Some accounts suggest admiration, others suggest dismissal, and some evidence suggests that colonial attitudes shaped how indigenous expertise was framed. You sit with that thought. The fire crackles softly. Someone laughs quietly, telling a story. The tone is warm, relaxed, and you imagine what these stories might include. Not just myths and legends, but practical history, voyages remembered, routes sung, islands named. Because oral tradition preserved what European maps tried to erase. You think again of the navigators' calm authority. The way they listened to the ocean. The way they followed birds. The way they watched clouds like they were reading a book. And you realize that even when Europeans arrived with compasses, Polynesian wayfinding didn't become obsolete overnight. Because a compass tells you direction. It doesn't tell you everything else. It doesn't tell you about swells, birds, or reef channels. It doesn't tell you how to survive when your tools break. And European tools did break. Ships were lost. Crews died. Expeditions failed. Meanwhile, Polynesian navigators had been thriving in this environment for centuries. Still, the arrival of European ships changed everything. Trade networks shifted. Power shifted. New religions arrived. New political boundaries were imposed. The stars above are partly hidden by tree branches, but you can still see enough to recognize how constant they are. How patient. You think about how the ancestors navigated without seeing land for weeks. How they trusted the system. How they trusted each other. And you think about the courage required for that. Not the loud, dramatic courage you see in movies. The quiet courage of stepping into a canoe and leaving the shore behind, knowing the ocean might not give you a second chance. The courage of trusting memory, trusting observation, trusting the invisible. And you realize something else. Wayfinding is not just about navigation. It's about humility. Because to wayfind, you must accept that you are small, that the ocean is vast, that your survival depends on paying attention, not dominating. You must become a student of the world, not its master. The insects continue singing. The lagoon water laps softly against the shore. The distant surf beyond the reef is like a constant deep breath. And you can feel sleep approaching thick and heavy. Your body relaxes. Your mind slows. The clearing feels like a safe pocket in the universe. And now, as you settle down on a woven mat, you let the memories of the voyage replay in your mind like a slow dream. The canoe rocking beneath you. The stars rising from the horizon. The navigator's calm face. The swells rolling under the hull. The birds gliding toward home. The smell of leaves carried on wind. The faint roar of surf. The careful approach through reef channels. And finally, the sand beneath your feet. You realize that the Pacific is not empty. It is full of roads. Roads made of water and wind. Roads written in starlight. Roads remembered in chance. Roads traced by birds. Roads felt through the body. And if you learn to read those roads, you can cross an ocean without ever being truly lost. Mainstream historical and archaeological research supports that Polynesians used double-hulled canoes for long-distance voyages, allowing them to carry people, plants, animals, and supplies, which is good because if you're going to settle an island, you can't just show up with vibes. You need food crops. You need tools. You need water containers. You need knowledge. You need, frankly, a level of planning that modern people struggle to achieve when packing for a weekend trip. You glance around at the supplies tied down with careful knots. There are gourds for water, bundles of dried food, fishing gear, maybe some live chickens, complaining softly like they already regret being invited. And then there's the crew. They move in a rhythm that makes you feel like the clumsy outsider you are. They know where to sit, when to adjust weight, how to respond to shifts in wind. The canoe isn't just a vehicle. It's a community. And the ocean isn't just water. It's a living road. You listen to the sounds around you. The wind brushing the sail, the slap of water against the hull, the faint rustle of woven mats. Even the silence has texture. It feels like you're inside a world that has been here for 1,000 years, unchanged, while modern life buzzes far away with its notifications and endless scrolling. And that's when the gentle humor of your situation hits you, because you, sitting there trying to look brave, are basically a human liability. If this were a group project, you would be the one assigned moral support. The navigator glances back at you, not unkindly, but with the faint expression of someone who has seen many enthusiastic amateurs before. They don't speak much. They don't need to. Their job is to pay attention. You follow their gaze upward. The sky is unbelievably crowded. In the city, you might see a handful of stars, like shy little dots peeking through light pollution. Out here, the stars are shameless. They fill the heavens like a spilled bag of glitter. You notice something else. The canoe is not cluttered. Everything has a place. Supplies are tied down. Tools are tucked away. Even the water gourds are secured so they won't roll around like bowling balls. And there's a reason for that. Out here, one mistake can become a chain reaction. A loose container can smash into something. A spilled water supply can mean dehydration. A broken tool can mean disaster. The ocean doesn't offer refunds. You stare out into the darkness, and the idea of being weeks away from land begins to sink in. You try to picture the nearest island. You can't. Your brain refuses to imagine a world without immediate escape routes. This is where the spiritual side of the canoe becomes more than just poetry. Because for many Polynesian cultures, the canoe wasn't merely a vehicle, it was sacred. It was a living thing, a connection between ancestors and descendants, a symbol of migration, identity, and survival. In some traditions, canoes were given names, treated with respect, and associated with rituals. The building of a canoe could involve ceremonies, offerings, and strict rules about who could touch what. Historians still argue whether some of these rituals were primarily spiritual in intent or served practical functions like reinforcing discipline and safety. But either way, the effect is the same. The canoe becomes something you don't treat casually. You don't kick it like a cheap rental kayak. You honor it. You glance at the wooden beams again, noticing the smoothness of the carving. You imagine the builders shaping it with stone tools in earlier centuries, long before metal became common in the Pacific. That's another mainstream fact. Polynesians developed sophisticated woodworking techniques with limited materials, using basalt adzes and coral abrasives. It's hard enough to build IKEA furniture with an Allen key and mild rage. Building an ocean-going canoe with stone tools? That's another level of commitment. And then, the navigator does something that makes you feel personally attacked. They close their eyes, just briefly, but long enough for you to panic internally. Because you're thinking, "Excuse me, sir or ma'am, we are in the middle of the largest ocean on Earth. This is not the time for a mindfulness break." But they're not napping. They're feeling. They're sensing the canoe's movement beneath them, the rhythm of the swells, the direction of the wind, the subtle pull of currents. They're using their body as an instrument. A quirky tidbit, and one that shows up in some accounts of Micronesian and Polynesian navigation training, is that navigators could memorize the feel of certain routes. Different swell patterns could create distinct motions like signatures. A master navigator might recognize whether they were drifting off course because the swell rhythm felt wrong. Imagine being so tuned into your surroundings that you can tell you're lost because the ocean's rocking is slightly off. Meanwhile, you can't even tell when you're hungry until you start feeling emotionally fragile. The navigator opens their eyes again and looks upward. The stars continue their slow migration across the sky, as if time itself is flowing through them. You start noticing something else. The stars are not all equally bright. Some shimmer, some glow steady, some appear redder, others bluer. The navigator knows them by personality as much as position. Certain stars are more reliable because they're brighter and easier to track near the horizon, where haze can blur dimmer ones. And the horizon matters a lot because the star compass is anchored there. It's the boundary between sea and sky, the line that never stops being useful. The navigator checks the horizon, then checks the canoe's bow. The canoe is aimed at a point just beneath a bright star. You realize you're literally sailing toward a star. Historians still argue whether Polynesian navigators relied more heavily on stars or on ocean swells as their primary guiding system, because accounts vary between regions and traditions. Some scholars emphasize the star compass, others emphasize swell reading, and some argue the true genius was the integration of all cues at once. And watching the navigator now, you suspect the answer is, it depends. It depends on weather. It depends on season. It depends on where you are. It depends on what the ocean decides to do tonight. Because the ocean is not consistent like the sky. The ocean changes mood. It shifts, plays tricks. You stare at the surface again, trying to see what the navigator might be seeing. At first, you think the ocean is just moving, but then you notice layers. There's a dominant swell, a long rolling motion coming from one direction. On top of that, smaller ripples may be caused by local wind. And beneath it all, a deeper rhythm you can feel through the canoe. The navigator can separate these patterns like a musician hearing different instruments in a song. You, on the other hand, are still trying to identify the difference between wave and more wave. Still, you try. You focus on the canoe's rocking. It lifts, dips, lifts again. You try to sense if the motion changes. You feel the canoe twist slightly, as if it's being nudged sideways by a cross swell. And for a moment, you think you feel it. Two swells crossing, one stronger than the other. Your brain lights up with satisfaction. Then you realize you might just be imagining it, which is honestly the modern human condition. But the navigator's face remains calm, eyes half-lidded, as if they're listening to the ocean's heartbeat. You look at their hands. They rest lightly, not gripping anything in panic. They're relaxed, but ready. And you realize that wayfinding isn't just knowledge. It's emotional control. If you panic, you miss details. If you rush, you lose the rhythm. And Polynesian navigators learned it through observation and experience. The canoe glides on, and you notice the wind shifting slightly. The sail adjusts, and the canoe's angle changes. The crew moves quietly, making small corrections. The navigator remains still, but their attention is intense. They're feeling the swells, watching the stars, sensing the wind, all at once. And you wonder, sleepily, how their brain can hold so much information. You can barely hold your own thoughts without dropping them. The canoe rises on a long swell. You feel yourself lifted gently, like you're floating. For a moment, the horizon seems to tilt, and you can see a wider sweep of the sky. Then the canoe slides down the swell's backside, and you settle again. The rhythm is hypnotic. It's like being rocked by a giant hand. You start thinking about the people who made these voyages historically. Families leaving one island for another, perhaps searching for resources, escaping conflict, exploring out of curiosity, or following traditions of expansion. There's evidence, archaeological, linguistic, genetic, that Polynesian migration occurred in waves over centuries. The Lapita culture, for example, is often associated with early Austronesian-speaking peoples who moved through Melanesia into the Pacific around 1500 BCE and later, leaving behind distinctive pottery styles. That's a mainstream historical fact that anchors this whole story. Polynesian voyaging didn't appear out of nowhere. It evolved over time, through generations of seafaring peoples who gradually pushed farther into the ocean. And you imagine what it must have felt like, leaving the familiar shoreline behind, watching your home shrink into the distance, knowing that you might never return. And then, night falls, and you're surrounded by nothing but swells and stars. You realize that for them, swells weren't just waves. They were reassurance. They were the ocean speaking back. You listen again. You hear water against the hull. A faint glow, a slight shift in cloud shape, a change in wind smell, all combining into a clear message. Land is out there. You, of course, would probably miss it entirely and keep sailing into oblivion while confidently saying, "I'm sure we're fine." But the navigator doesn't miss it. They make a small adjustment with the steering paddle, shifting the canoe's heading by what seems like a tiny amount. The crew doesn't question it. They trust it, because the navigator is not guessing. They are reading. The canoe continues forward, and the clouds ahead grow larger, more defined. The wind picks up slightly, bringing with it a stronger scent now. Definitely vegetation and maybe even smoke from distant cooking fires, though that could be your imagination. You think about how incredible it is that people could cross oceans and find islands using nothing but these signs. And then you remember that for most of human history, people had no choice but to pay attention. They didn't have weather apps. They didn't have satellite images. They had eyes. They had noses. They had memory. And they had stories passed down from elders who had done this before. The canoe's movement changes slightly. The swell pattern feels different, less uniform, more complicated. You feel a faint cross motion, as if waves are bouncing back from something. The navigator notices too, glancing down at the water briefly, then back up to the clouds. You realize this is how wayfinding works. Constant cross-checking. The navigator is building a case like a quiet detective. Clouds suggest land. Smell suggests land. Swells suggest land. So the navigator adjusts course accordingly. You watch the underside of the clouds. Some appear darker. Some appear faintly luminous. The luminous ones hang lower, like they're being pulled toward the sea. Not because they're trying to help you, but because they're doing what birds do, which is honestly the best kind of help. Unintentional. You lean forward slightly, watching them vanish into the darkness. Then you hear another sound. A call. Soft, distant, but unmistakably alive. It's a bird call drifting over the water. You feel your skin prickle. Not with fear, but with the strange comfort of hearing life in the emptiness. The ocean at night can feel like a void. But bird calls remind you that you're not alone. That there are islands out there, ecosystems, forests, cliffs, nesting sites. The navigator listens too. Their head tilts, eyes half closed, as if they're absorbing the sound like music. And then, in a small moment of gentle humor, you imagine the navigator thinking, "Ah yes, that bird sounds annoyed. We must be near home." Because birds always sound annoyed. It's like their whole personality is complaining loudly while flying. The canoe continues forward. The swells shift subtly, becoming slightly choppier. The air feels thicker. The clouds ahead look taller, and the faint glow beneath them is more obvious now. The birds keep appearing. One here, two there, small groups gliding toward the same direction. The navigator doesn't smile. They don't celebrate, but you can feel their confidence growing, like a quiet certainty settling in. They make another small adjustment to the steering paddle. The canoe's heading changes slightly, aligning with the direction the birds are traveling. And you realize the navigator is not blindly following birds. They're integrating them into the whole map. Stars confirm the broad direction. Swells confirm the steady path. Clouds hint at land. Birds confirm land's location. Everything layers together. It's like building a picture out of faint brushstrokes. You glance upward again. The stars are still there, but the horizon is beginning to lighten ever so slightly. You just have to trust the signs. You have to trust your training. You have to trust the ocean's whispers. The driftwood continues. Leaves appear now and then. A small cluster of floating vegetation drifts by, tangled together like a little raft. The navigator watches it with quiet satisfaction. And then you hear a sound. A soft splash. You look toward the water and see something move just beneath the surface. A fish, perhaps, or something larger. You realize that fish activity can also be a sign. Reefs attract fish. Shallow waters create different ecosystems. As you near land, the sea becomes more populated, more active. Even the ocean's creatures are telling you where you are. The canoe glides forward, and in the distance you begin to hear something else. Not a bird call this time. A low, continuous roar. At first, it's so faint you think it's the wind. But it grows louder and you realize what it is. Surf. Waves breaking on a reef or shoreline, sending sound across the water. That sound is one of the most unmistakable signs of land. You can't see the reef yet, but you can hear it, like the island is breathing loudly in its sleep. Your heart lifts slightly, even though you're trying to stay calm and sleepy. The navigator hears it too. Their head tilts, and their eyes narrow toward the sound. They listen carefully, as if judging distance by volume and rhythm. Because even sound is part of wayfinding. You can tell whether surf is far or near. You can tell whether it's breaking on a reef or crashing on a rocky shore. The sound has texture. The crew is awake now, but still quiet. No one speaks loudly. This isn't a loud triumph. It's a careful approach. Because land is not always safe. Reefs can tear canoes apart. Waves can flip you. Shorelines can be dangerous. So even as the signs of land increase, the navigator's focus sharpens. They are not done. They are simply entering the most delicate phase of the journey. In some Pacific societies, navigators held high status. Their ability to travel between islands meant they could carry messages, trade goods, and cultural connections. They were like living bridges between worlds. You picture a navigator arriving at an island after a long voyage, stepping onto the shore with quiet confidence. People gathering, offering food, asking for news. And you realize how different that is from modern travel. When you arrive somewhere now, you mostly just look for your luggage and complain about airport prices. But in the past, arrival was an event. Because it meant the navigator succeeded. It meant the ocean was crossed. It meant the route was still known. And in a world of scattered islands, that knowledge was everything. You shift on your mat, feeling the canoe's steady motion. The surf sound grows a little louder. The smell of vegetation is stronger now, and you can almost imagine trees ahead, even if you can't see them. The navigator murmurs again, perhaps reciting a sequence of star names, perhaps recalling the route, perhaps checking their internal map against the world. And you begin to understand why chants are so useful. Because when you're tired, hungry,